The night was cold and dark, the kind of night that sends shivers down your spine. In the heart of Geneva, a city that would later become synonymous with the name John Calvin, a crowd gathered around a wooden stake. The air was thick with tension and the smell of wood smoke. At the center of it all stood a man, Michael Servetus, bound and helpless. His eyes, wide with fear, darted around the crowd, searching for a face of mercy. But there was none. Servetus, a Spanish physician and theologian, had been caught in Geneva after escaping from the clutches of the Catholic Inquisition his crime, denying the doctrine of the Trinity, a belief that had long been a cornerstone of Christian faith. The city leaders, with the input of John Calvin, had deemed him a heretic. The punishment was clear: burning at the stake. As the flames began to lick at Servetus's feet, he cried out in agony. The crowd, a mix of supporters and detractors, watched in silence. Some whispered prayers, others cursed the man. But one person, standing at the edge of the crowd, felt a deep sense of unease. John Calvin, the man who had been instrumental in bringing Servetus to this fate, looked on with a heavy heart. Calvin had argued for a less cruel punishment, beheading, but the city leaders were adamant. They wanted to send a message. Servetus was not the only one on trial that night. The future of Geneva and the spread of the Reformation hung in the balance. A few years earlier, John Calvin had been a man on the run. Exiled from Geneva, he had found refuge in Strasbourg, a city that welcomed him with open arms. But the call of duty and a deep sense of purpose brought him back to the city that had once rejected him. When he returned, he could have sought revenge against those who had opposed him. He could have reminded them of his triumph. But Calvin chose a different path. In a letter to a friend in Basel, written less than a year after his return, Calvin wrote, "I value the public peace and concord so highly that I lay restraint upon myself, and this praise even the adversaries are compelled to award to me. This feeling prevails to such an extent that from day to day those who were once open enemies have become friends. Others I conciliate by courtesy, and I feel that I have been in some measure successful." Calvin's words were not just empty promises. He had the power to exact revenge, but he chose to build bridges instead. His commitment to peace and unity was so strong that even his former enemies began to respect him. This was a man who understood the power of forgiveness and the importance of community. But Geneva was not just a city of political intrigue. It was also a city facing a crisis of a different kind. A plague had swept through the region, decimating entire communities. When it reached Geneva, the city was unprepared. The disease spread quickly, and soon a tenth of the population was dead. The city was in chaos, and the people were terrified. Calvin, known for his dedication to his faith and his community, offered to help. He wanted to visit the sick, to provide comfort and care. But the city's ministers, recognizing the danger, refused to let him. They insisted that Calvin stay at the church, where he could continue his work without putting himself at risk. Calvin respected their decision, but his heart ached for those who were suffering. The burning of Michael Servetus would go down in history as one of the darkest moments in Calvin's life. It would be used by his detractors to paint him as a cruel and unforgiving man. But the truth was far more complex. Calvin was a man of deep faith, a man who believed in the power of God's grace and the importance of community. He was not perfect, and he made mistakes. But he was also a man who sought to lead with compassion and wisdom. As the flames continued to rise, Calvin turned away from the crowd. He knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. but he was determined to continue his work, to build a city that reflected the values of the Reformation. Little did he know that his legacy would continue to shape the world for centuries to come. While Calvin was busy in Geneva, the Reformation was spreading to other parts of Europe. In England, the story was about to take a dramatic turn. King Henry VIII, a man known for his many wives and his break with the Catholic Church, had set the stage for a religious revolution. His son, Edward VI, would continue the reforms, and his daughter, Mary Tudor, would attempt to reverse them. But it was Elizabeth, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, who would ultimately shape the future of England and the spread of Calvinism. As the flames of the Reformation spread, a new group of believers emerged. They were called Puritans, and they were determined to purify the Church of England from what they saw as the remnants of Catholicism. Their journey would be filled with trials and triumphs, and their influence would be felt far beyond the shores of England. But that is a story for another time. For now, the night in Geneva was drawing to a close, and the city was left to grapple with the consequences of its actions. The burning of Michael Servetus was a stark reminder of the power of faith, the dangers of intolerance, and the complexity of human nature. The rise and fall of kings and queens played a big role in how Calvinism spread across England and Scotland. Let's dive into how this happened, starting with the reigns of James I and Charles I, and then moving on to the dramatic story of the Reformation in Scotland. When Elizabeth I died in 1603, she had no children to take over the throne. She had chosen James, the son of Mary Stuart and the King of Scotland, to be her heir. James became James I of England, while still being James VI of Scotland. Scotland had already gone through a lot of changes, thanks to John Knox, who had pushed for a more reformed and Calvinist way of thinking. James, however, was more interested in having a strong monarchy with a lot of power. He believed that bishops were essential for a king to have authority, saying, "Without bishops, there is no king." This didn't sit well with the Puritans, who wanted a simpler, more Bible-focused church. James tried to keep things balanced by keeping some of Elizabeth's policies, but he also wanted more control. When he needed money, he had to call Parliament, which had a lot of Puritans. They didn't like his ideas, and tensions grew. One time, when a Puritan mentioned a presbytery, a church governed by elders, James got so angry that he said there was no closer connection between a monarchy and a presbytery than between God and the devil. Despite this, one good thing came out of that Parliament session. They approved a new translation of the Bible, which became the King James Version. James tried to rule without Parliament, but by 1614, he was running out of money and had to call them back. The Puritans in Parliament stood their ground, and James dissolved it in frustration. This period of tension led many Puritans to look for a new home, which is why the Mayflower set sail in 1620, carrying the Pilgrims to America. When James died, his son Charles I took over. Charles continued the conflict with Parliament and made things worse by appointing William Laud as the Archbishop of Canterbury. Laud was a strong opponent of the Puritans and even ordered the execution and mutilation of some of them. He also tried to force the Scottish Church to adopt more Catholic practices, which led to a rebellion. The Scottish Church abolished the episcopacy, the system of bishops, and reorganized as a Presbyterian church. Charles needed money to fight this rebellion, so he had to call Parliament. But they weren't happy with him and refused to give him what he wanted. This led to a civil war. During the war, Parliament called a group of theologians to advise them. This group, known as the Westminster Assembly, wrote the Westminster Confession of Faith and the shorter and larger catechisms, which are still important documents for many Protestants today. William Laud was eventually executed by Parliament in 1644. Oliver Cromwell, a Puritan and a member of the House of Commons, emerged as a leader during the Civil War. He believed that every decision should be guided by God's will and was known for his deep study of the Bible. Cromwell built a powerful cavalry and inspired his troops with his faith. They believed they were fighting a holy war and would sing hymns as they went into battle. Cromwell's army was unstoppable and eventually captured King Charles, who was tried, condemned, and beheaded in 1649. Cromwell refused the crown but became the Lord Protector of England, leading a republic. After Cromwell's death, his son took over but wasn't up to the task. This led to the restoration of the monarchy under Charles II, who had secretly been a Catholic. His brother, James II, also wanted to restore Catholicism, which led to another rebellion. The English invited William of Orange and his wife Mary, James's daughter, to take the throne, which they did in 1688. Now, let's turn to Scotland, where the Reformation was even more dramatic. Before John Knox, Scotland was a poor and backward country. The people were uneducated and superstitious, and the Catholic Church had a strong hold on them. Knox, born in 1510, was influenced by two important figures, Patrick Hamilton and George Wishart. Both were killed for their Reformed beliefs, which deeply affected Knox. When Cardinal Beaton, who had ordered their deaths, was assassinated, Protestants took over St. Andrews. Knox, though reluctant at first, began preaching there with great power and passion. Mary, Queen of Scots, who had grown up in the luxury of the French court, returned to Scotland in 1560. She was not happy about the changes Knox and the Protestants were making, and they often clashed over the role of Catholicism in Scotland. Despite the challenges, Knox's preaching and leadership helped transform Scotland. By the 1600s, Scotland had become almost entirely Calvinist, and this change had a lasting impact on the country and the world. The transformation of Scotland from a poor, backward land to a place of moral and intellectual leadership is a testament to the power of the Reformation and the influence of John Knox. His work laid the foundation for Scotland to become a major force in shaping the modern world. John Knox's life was filled with dramatic turns and powerful moments that shaped not only his own destiny but also the course of Scottish and world history. His journey began in St. Andrews, a coastal town in Scotland, where he first found his voice as a preacher. However, his life took a dark turn when French ships answering the call of Mary Guise, the regent of Scotland, besieged St. Andrews. Knox was captured and became a galley slave, a fate that was often a death sentence. The conditions were brutal. Slaves rode without any protection from the elements, enduring harsh weather, poor food, and unsanitary conditions. Despite this, Knox's faith remained unshaken. One day, while rowing next to his friend John Balfour, Knox shared his unwavering belief that God would deliver them. Balfour, weak and malnourished, asked Knox if he thought they would ever get out of their dire situation alive. Knox, drawing on the story of Joseph, who was sold into slavery but ultimately saved his people, replied with confidence that God would deliver them and that they would return to their homeland. As they passed St. Andrews, Knox pointed to the steeple of the place where he had first preached and declared that he would not die until he glorified God there again. His words proved prophetic. In 1549, after 19 months of captivity, Knox was freed through a prisoner exchange. He was in poor health, but gradually recovered under the care of sympathetic nobles in England. Knox's health improved enough for him to take on responsibilities, and he was appointed as a court preacher. However, the political landscape shifted again when Mary Tudor, known as Bloody Mary, ascended the throne and began persecuting Protestants. Knox fled to Geneva, Switzerland, where he met John Calvin, a leading figure in the Reformation. Although Calvin was busy with the fallout from the execution of Michael Servetus, Knox still absorbed many of Calvin's ideas through his assistance. Knox spent time in Geneva, learning and growing in his understanding of Reformed theology. In 1556, Knox returned to Scotland and convinced several nobles to enter into a covenant that was both political and theological. These nobles, known as the Covenanters, were committed to the Reformed faith. However, the political situation in Scotland was tense, and the Scottish Civil War broke out in 1559. Queen Elizabeth of England, who had recently come to power, supported the Scottish Protestants, while Mary Guise, the regent, sought help from France. The tide turned in favor of the Protestants when Mary Guise died in 1560, and the Civil War subsided. Knox's influence grew, and he played a crucial role in shaping the new government in Scotland. He wrote the Scots Confession, a statement of faith that the Scottish Parliament adopted, and the Book of Discipline, which outlined a vision for a representative form of government. Knox's ideas were revolutionary for their time, as they emphasized that power should be vested in offices, not individuals, and that the law should be above the king. This concept, known as Lex Rex, the law is king, would later influence the founding of the United States. Despite his influence, Knox faced opposition from the nobles, who did not endorse his reforms. However, his preaching continued to inspire and mobilize the people. When Mary Stuart, also known as Mary, Queen of Scots, returned to Scotland, she tried to win over the nobles and the people with charm and diplomacy. But Knox remained steadfast in his opposition to her attempts to restore Catholicism. Mary feared Knox's influence and once said, "I fear the prayers of John Knox more than all the assembled armies of Europe." Mary's efforts to consolidate power eventually led to her downfall. She was forced to abdicate the throne in 1567 and sought refuge in England, where she was later executed. Her son, James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England, was crowned at the age of 104. Knox preached at his coronation, marking a significant moment in Scottish history. Knox's legacy extended far beyond Scotland. His ideas and the Reformed faith he championed influenced the development of modern Western civilization in numerous ways. The Scots, inspired by Knox and Calvinism, made significant contributions to fields such as banking, industry, science, education, and government. They created a universal system of education that became a model for the world and produced influential thinkers like Adam Smith, who wrote The Wealth of Nations, and Lord Kames, who developed the modern study of history. Knox's vision of a government of the people, by the people, and for the people was at the core of the founding of America. The Scottish influence on the American Revolution and the development of the U.S. Constitution is evident in documents like Sam Rutherford's Lex Rex, which argued that the king is not above the law and that the people have the right to resist tyranny. This idea, rooted in Calvinism, has been a cornerstone of American democracy and a symbol of liberty and freedom around the world. John Knox's life and legacy show how one person, driven by faith and a commitment to justice, can have a profound impact on history. His unwavering belief in God's sovereignty and his dedication to reforming both church and state have left an indelible mark on the world. In 1619, about 12 years after the Jamestown colony was set up, a ship carrying 20 enslaved people from Africa arrived. The ship had been blown off course, and the pirates on board were trying to sell these people into slavery in the Caribbean. The Jamestown settlers didn't have the money to send the enslaved people back to Africa, and they didn't want to be part of the slave trade. Instead, they offered to take the enslaved people as indentured servants. This meant the people would work for 7 years to pay off their debt, and then they would be free. All 20 agreed and stayed. Many of them became successful after their 7 years of service. In contrast, the Plymouth colony was started by a group of religious people called Congregationalist Calvinists. They had left England because they were being persecuted for their beliefs. They spent 11 years in the Netherlands, but were worried their children were losing their English heritage. So, they decided to start a new life in America. They arrived in 1620 and called their settlement Plymouth Plantation. Before landing, they wrote a document called the Mayflower Compact, which was like a social contract for their new community. They said they were coming to America for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith. The Massachusetts Bay Company was the third major colony, established in 1630 by Puritans. The Puritans were also religious people who wanted to purify the Church of England. Their leader, John Winthrop, gave a famous sermon before they landed. He said, "We are entering into a covenant with God for this work. We must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us." This idea came from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount in the Bible. Later, more colonies were established. Rhode Island was founded by Roger Williams, who believed that people should be free to practice their own religion. Connecticut was very strict in its religious beliefs. The middle colonies, like Virginia, New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey, and Delaware, were more diverse. Pennsylvania was founded by Quakers, and Maryland was meant to be a safe place for Catholics. North and South Carolina were started for business reasons, and Georgia was the last colony founded in 1732 to protect the border and help solve problems in English prisons. By the time of the Revolutionary War, there were about 3 million people living in the American colonies. Many of them were of the Reformed faith, like Presbyterians and Congregationalists. These people believed in the importance of law and that authority should be held by offices, not individuals, to prevent corruption. They were the ones who fought against the British and helped create a new nation. The Presbyterians played a big role in the Revolutionary War. They believed it was their duty to resist unjust rulers. Many Presbyterian ministers preached about the importance of standing up to tyranny. Some even fought as soldiers. One famous example is John Craighead, who alternated between preaching and fighting. Another is James Caldwell, who used hymn books as wadding for the soldiers' guns when they ran out of paper. Tragically, Caldwell's wife was killed by the British, and their home was burned down. The Presbyterian Church was the first to call for independence from Britain. They had a long history of standing up for what they believed was right, even if it meant going to war. They saw their fight as a spiritual battle, and they were willing to put their faith into action. Today we often talk about tolerance as a good thing. But sometimes, being too tolerant can mean accepting things that are wrong. Our Presbyterian ancestors understood that being a Christian meant standing up for what is right, even if it was difficult. They believed in God's law and were willing to fight for it. We can learn from their example and remember that sometimes being intolerant of evil is the right thing to do. The legacy of the Presbyterians and other Reformed Christians is a reminder that faith can inspire people to make a difference in the world. They believed in the importance of standing up for their beliefs and working together to create a better society. Their actions helped shape the United States into the nation it is today. The Great Awakening was a powerful movement that changed the way people in the American colonies thought about their faith and their unity. It was a time when people started to see themselves as part of a larger, more connected community. This chapter will explore some of the key figures and events that prepared the way for this great spiritual revival. By the 1700s, the American colonies were becoming more prosperous. Cities like Philadelphia and Boston were thriving. The descendants of the original colonists were enjoying a comfortable life far removed from the hardships and religious persecution their ancestors had faced. However, this comfort led to a more relaxed approach to faith. The established churches, known as the Old Lights, were seen as complacent and lacking in spiritual fervor. At the same time, a new group of people, the New Lights, began to emerge. Many of these New Lights were recent immigrants from Ireland, particularly the Scots-Irish, who had faced religious persecution and hard times in their homeland. When they arrived in America, they were disappointed by the lukewarm faith of the Old Lights. They believed that true Christianity required a deep, personal experience of God and a commitment to living a holy life. One of the early leaders of the New Lights was William Tennant. He was a powerful preacher who believed in the importance of being born again and living a life dedicated to God. The Old Lights often rejected his style of preaching, so he founded the Log College to train preachers who shared his passion. This college later became part of Princeton University, one of the most prestigious institutions in America. William's son Gilbert was even more intense in his preaching. He believed that true faith came from experiencing the terror of sin and the reality of hell. His sermons were so powerful that they could make people feel as if they were standing on the edge of a cliff looking down into the abyss. This style of preaching was not well received by the Old Lights, and Gilbert was often not allowed to preach in their churches. Despite this, he continued to spread his message, influencing many people with his fiery words. Another important figure was Alexander Craighead, a New Light preacher who had come to Pennsylvania from Scotland as a child. His sermons often included anti-British sentiments, which made him unpopular with British loyalists. Craighead was a key figure in the migration from Pennsylvania to North Carolina, where he became the pastor of Sugaw Creek Presbyterian Church. He is also considered the spiritual father of the Mecklenburg Declaration, a document that declared independence from Britain, which influenced Thomas Jefferson when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. Jonathan Edwards was a brilliant theologian and one of the most influential figures of the Great Awakening. Born in Connecticut, he became the pastor of Northampton Church at the age of 23. His sermons were known for their intellectual depth and spiritual power. One of his most famous sermons, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, is often misunderstood as a hellfire sermon, but it actually emphasizes God's grace and the need for repentance. Edwards was sympathetic to the New Lights and is sometimes called one himself, although his preaching style was much more subdued. David Brainerd was a young man with a deep calling to be a missionary. He entered Yale but was expelled for making a remark about a tutor. Despite this setback, he was ordained by the New Lights and began preaching to Native American tribes. For 4 years, he traveled on horseback, often in poor health, with little success. However, one day his message finally resonated with a small Delaware Indian village. The people gathered around him, listening intently, and many were moved to tears. Brainerd's journal, published after his death, became a bestseller and inspired the founding of Princeton and Dartmouth universities. Ben Franklin, a famous figure in American history, might seem like an unlikely ally in the Great Awakening. In his youth, he was a rationalist who believed in living a good life without the need for religion. However, later in life, he became a strong supporter of George Whitefield, a prominent preacher during the Great Awakening. Franklin's printing business helped spread Whitefield's sermons, and he even called for prayer during the drafting of the Constitution, showing his deep respect for the role of faith in public life. George Whitefield was one of the most influential preachers of the Great Awakening. He traveled throughout the colonies, delivering powerful sermons that touched the hearts of many. His preaching style was passionate and emotional, and he had a gift for connecting with people from all walks of life. Whitefield's influence extended beyond the pulpit. He inspired many to seek a deeper relationship with God and to work for social change. The Great Awakening was a turning point in American history. It brought people together, strengthened their faith, and laid the groundwork for the revolutionary ideas that would soon follow. The figures discussed in this chapter played a crucial role in preparing the way for this spiritual revival, shaping the future of the nation. What makes a nation? Imagine you have a big puzzle, and each piece is a part of a country. Some pieces are the land, some are the people, and others are the beliefs and values that hold everything together. Historian C. Greg Singer once said that to really understand a country, you need to look at its beliefs and values or its religion. This is because the core beliefs of a country are like the glue that holds all the pieces of the puzzle together. In the early days of America, a big part of this glue was a type of Christianity called Calvinism. Calvinism is a set of beliefs that emphasize the power and sovereignty of God, the need for personal salvation, and the idea that all people are equal before God. This belief system had a huge impact on how people thought and acted, and it shaped the way the country developed. As America grew, two different streams of faith emerged. One stream was the New Lights, who were very passionate about their faith and believed in the power of the Holy Spirit to change people's lives. They emphasized the need for a personal experience of salvation and the idea that all people, no matter their social status, could have a direct relationship with God. The other stream was the Old Lights, who were more traditional and formal in their approach to religion. They placed a lot of importance on education, social status, and the proper way of doing things. They often saw themselves as the elite and expected people to treat them with respect and provide for their needs. These two streams of faith had very different ideas about what it meant to be free and united. For the New Lights, freedom meant being free from the control of human authorities and having a direct relationship with God. They believed in a union of people who were all equal before God, regardless of their social status. For the Old Lights, freedom often meant the freedom to maintain their social and economic status. They saw union as a way to keep the social order and maintain their power. They were more concerned with tradition and the way things had always been done. The word liberty meant different things to these two groups. For the New Lights, liberty was about personal freedom and the ability to follow God's will without interference from human authorities. They believed that everyone should have the chance to hear the gospel and experience salvation. For the Old Lights, liberty was more about maintaining their own freedom and status. They were less concerned with the freedom of others and more focused on keeping things the way they were. Similarly, the word union had different meanings. For the New Lights, union was about bringing people together in a common faith and purpose. They believed that all people, rich or poor, educated or not, were equal before God and should work together to build a better society. For the Old Lights, union was more about maintaining the social order and keeping everyone in their place. They were more concerned with preserving their own power and status than with bringing people together. Calvinism, especially the New Light version, had a big impact on the way people thought about freedom and unity. It helped people see that they were all equal before God and that they should work together to build a better society. This idea of equality and cooperation was a key part of the American Revolution and the formation of the United States. Calvinism also influenced the way people thought about government. It emphasized the idea that all people, including those in power, were subject to God's laws. This meant that no one should have absolute power, and that everyone should be held accountable for their actions. In the end, the New Light Calvinists played a significant role in shaping the values and beliefs that formed the foundation of the United States. Their emphasis on personal freedom, equality, and cooperation helped create a country where people could come together to build a better future. In the years leading up to the American Revolution, there was a big difference in how people thought about the world. On one side were the liberals, who believed that people could improve themselves through effort and learning. They thought that by working hard and becoming better, they could find their way to salvation. This idea of self-improvement is something we still see a lot today. People often talk about personal growth and self-help as if it's a kind of religion. On the other side were the Calvinists, who had a very different view. For them, the most important thing was a deep, personal connection with God. They believed that only through faith in Jesus Christ could someone truly be saved. This wasn't something that could be achieved by human effort alone. Instead, it was a gift from God, and it had to be experienced in the heart. The Calvinists thought that true union with God meant looking away from the world and focusing on spiritual things, as the Bible says, "Set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on earth." Col 3:2. But this didn't mean they should just sit back and do nothing. They believed that being a Christian meant actively engaging with the world and trying to make it better, even if that meant facing conflicts and challenges. One of the key words that people talked about a lot back then was liberty. For the Calvinists, liberty wasn't about doing whatever you wanted. It was about being free from the rules and restrictions that people and society tried to impose. They believed that true freedom came from being free in Christ, which meant following God's commands and living a life that honored Him. This idea is similar to what the Apostle Paul wrote in his letter to the Colossians. Here, there is not Greek and Jew, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave, free, but Christ is all and in all. Col 3:11. This kind of freedom meant that everyone was equal in God's eyes, regardless of their background or status. As time went on, the influence of Puritanism, which was closely tied to Calvinism, started to decline. Instead, a new way of thinking called deism became more popular. Deism was based on the idea that people could use their reason to understand God and what He wanted from them. The Bible was still important, but only to the extent that it agreed with what people thought was right and reasonable. This idea was very appealing to many people, especially those who were influenced by the Enlightenment, a movement that emphasized the power of human reason. Deism had a big impact on the American Revolution. It helped to spread the idea that people had the right to govern themselves, and that governments should be responsible to the people, not to God. This idea was very different from the Calvinist view, which saw government as something that should be under God's authority. One of the most famous deists of the time was Thomas Jefferson, who believed that people had the right to choose their leaders and that the government should serve the people's needs. By the early 1800s, deism was becoming less popular, especially in New England, but it didn't disappear. Instead, it transformed into a new movement called Transcendentalism. Transcendentalists believed that the whole universe was connected to God and that people were inherently good. They thought that by improving themselves and the world around them, they could achieve a higher state of being. This idea was very different from the Calvinist belief that people were sinful and needed God's grace to be saved. Transcendentalists were very passionate about reforming society, and they saw themselves as the ones who could lead the way to a better world. One of the most famous transcendentalists was Ralph Waldo Emerson, who wrote, "Let man stand erect, go alone, and possess the universe." This idea of individualism and self-reliance was very appealing to many people, but it also had its downsides. Some people used it to justify their own selfish desires, while others genuinely wanted to make the world a better place. The differences between these two worldviews, Calvinism and the more human-centered ideas, played a big role in the tensions that led to the Civil War. In the South, many people still held on to the Calvinist belief that true freedom and equality came from God, not from human laws. They saw the push for abolition as being driven by people who had moved away from traditional Christian values and were more focused on their own ideas of what was right and wrong. In the North, the movement for abolition was often tied to the more humanistic and reform-minded ideas of transcendentalism and Unitarianism. These groups believed that they had the knowledge and the moral authority to change society for the better. This led to a lot of conflict, as the South saw these ideas as a threat to their way of life and their understanding of God's plan. Today, we still see these same kinds of divisions in society. On one side are those who believe that true freedom and equality come from God, and that we should live according to His laws. On the other side are those who believe that we can create our own version of freedom and equality through human effort and reason. These differences continue to shape how people think about government, society, and what it means to be free. As we wrap up our journey through the rich tapestry of history, we've explored many fascinating stories and ideas that have shaped the world we live in today. From the early American colonies to the Great Awakening, from the life of John Calvin to the struggles of John Knox, each chapter has added a piece to the puzzle of how our modern world came to be. We've seen how the beliefs and actions of individuals can have a profound impact on history. For example, the courage of John Knox in Scotland and the leadership of Jonathan Edwards during the Great Awakening showed us that standing up for what you believe in can inspire change and transformation. These stories remind us that even in difficult times, we can make a difference. We've also delved into the complex world of politics and religion, from the American Revolution to the debates between Arminians and Calvinists. These discussions highlight the importance of understanding different perspectives and the need for critical thinking. It's not always easy to navigate these waters, but it's crucial for building a just and fair society. The Enlightenments and the rise of new philosophical ideas, like deism and transcendentalism, have shown us how human thought can evolve and influence culture. While these ideas have brought about many positive changes, they've also raised important questions about the role of faith and reason in our lives. Throughout our journey, we've encountered many great thinkers and leaders, from Thomas Jefferson to C.S. Lewis, who have left a lasting legacy. Their works continue to inspire and challenge us to think deeply about the world around us. But perhaps the most important lesson we've learned is the power of community and the importance of working together. Whether it's the early settlers of Jamestown, the Covenanters in Scotland, or the founding fathers of the United States, history shows us that when people come together with a common purpose, they can achieve great things. As you move forward, remember that the stories of the past are not just about what happened long ago. They are living lessons that can guide us in the present and shape our future. Whether you're facing challenges in your own life or looking to make a difference in the world, the lessons of history can provide wisdom and inspiration. So, as you close this book, take a moment to reflect on what you've learned. Think about how you can apply these lessons in your own life. And remember, just like the people we've studied, you have the power to make a positive impact on the world around you. Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep striving to make a difference. The future is in your hands.